translates over really well, especially when we're talking about things like student engagement or, industry-specific learning and things like that. So just to start off, we're going to, gauge your understanding. What you see in the background, does anyone have any idea about the bridge that is? Anyone know where? Does anyone have a guess where? Tacoma, Washington, exactly. And we're going to get into this a little bit. Just for the record, no one was killed. I do think there was a dog that was left on the bridge when it collapsed. So I think it did take one canine fatality. All right, we're up to 35 already. This is fantastic. All right, in a couple moments, I'm going to hit start. So if you're not in, we'll see the results. Due to an issue in this bridge's construction, the way it was put together and when they were talking about or thinking about what it was going to be intended for and how it was going to withstand all that weight, they forgot some crucial aspects, which led to some structural issues. And when that happened, I guess the wind picked up one day and it started to sway a little bit, and then it picked up and gradually it couldn't stop. And I think this is a good starting point for where we're going with this. We will have some time at the end to kind of talk about these things too, and we'll take any questions. So we'll start with this. So, wow, 78, eh? I didn't even know there were that many people in here, so that's pretty cool. So 78, we're going to start. So how big of a role does technology play in your classroom? And I have 4 options for you up there. Everything from non-existent to technology is life, the rest is just details. I actually saw a guy in Welland the other day with a pizza is life, the rest is just details shirt. I thought that was pretty good too. So. If you've been to Welland, you'll know that we have some excellent pizza. So we have 52 people that said somewhat major. 18 people say technology is life, the rest is just details, so we're wavering on the extreme side of things. 1 says non-existent, so that's 1 out of 78. And 6 say a minor role. So I think we're really edging towards this idea of technology as being this huge, huge aspect of our class, and that's why we're here too. I'm kind of preaching to the choir in that respect. Let's move on to the next question. How supportive is your school in allowing teachers to integrate tech into curriculum design? Everything from don't use that word, to laissez-faire. I'm sorry if my French is off. We ask this because obviously at the college we have different policies about how we're using it. And we know that doesn't always translate over. In fact, I was talking to a friend today who explained, well, yeah, some people are still part of the old guard and they're very cautious about it. Well, some people are really ingrained in it. So we have, what's this number up here? 39 say somewhat supportive, and 35 say laissez-faire, which is actually surprising to me, and I'm glad to see those numbers. I'm even happier to see 0 chose the don't use that word, which says things about the reasons why we're here. I think, especially if we're talking about school boards and schools, everyone has their different policy about how they're using it, and that's kind of what we're going to try and navigate around today, so bear with us. And last question, what are the major concerns with regards to having students engage with technology? Distracting behaviors, inappropriate interactions, cyberbullying. Concerns, what concerns? $70, 80 answers. Wow, I didn't even know there are that many people in this room. So 40, I think it's distracting. Inappropriate interactions is in a bit of a second place. Concerns, what concerns? There's no concerns at all, and cyberbullying. So thanks for taking part in that. And I think, what we get from that is that we all are from different backgrounds and we all have different understandings about how technology can be used or can be, brought into the classrooms. Now, for some reason, It's not working for me up here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. And there we have the Tacoma Bridge again. So the name of our presentation, or I guess what we're calling it and what we've decided to go, do with it, is Building Bridges, a connected and collaborative approach to creating classroom community. It's very alliterative, using the bridge metaphor to the fullest extreme. I like that. My name is Matt Sajn, and this is my colleague, Tania Fera-VanGent. We're both teachers at Niagara College within the communications department. Our outcomes today are pretty straightforward. I mean, first, we want to engage collaboratively with tools to enhance community in the classroom. Two, we're going to explore the concept of community via technology, and we're going to integrate classroom community techniques into our own practice. And lastly, let's reflect on how notions of the third space relate to perpetually changing learning environments. And this idea of the third space is something I'll get into shortly. It started off as a bit of a post-colonial theory, and it's kind of moved to media and moved to education within the last few years. And I think as educators who are willing to engage with technology, we have a role to play in ensuring that these spaces are facilitated and ensuring that these spaces are constructive and I guess positive for our students. And we're going to go from things like Linowit to Google Docs, talk about blogging a bit, and I guess end with some things about digital citizenship. So we're kind of covering the map today. We're scratching the surface, but in doing so, we hope to kind of show one structure that you can see technology through. And again, our Twitters are up here. Feel free to tweet us throughout the presentation. Although I won't really have my phone in my hand, so I can't engage with you now. I promise I'll engage with everyone who does tweet me during the presentation. My name's Matt. This is Tania, as we went over. We work, and part of our role at Niagara College is ensuring that we can, use technology in the classrooms, and not just use it, but actually show students how to use it safely. As communications instructors, I think we would be missing something fundamental if we didn't talk about that. Because technology is how we communicate. I mean, you know that. We're here. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that like 10 times today already. That might be a low ball. But when we're talking about technology, we're talking about one of the main forces of communication. And that's kind of where we're picking up with this. In our jobs, we work with students in programs such as, right now I'm working with brewmasters, horticulture students, and hospitality students. I know Tania and I cross over into programs like, again, horticulture, sports management, business. So we're all over the map, and we're dealing with all sorts of industries around the Niagara region. And part of doing that effectively is developing these relationships over social media and encouraging students to do the same.
I just want to contextualize the college atmosphere for technology. There are faculty that embrace technology, and there are faculty that want phones, everything shut down, shut it down. So Matt and I tend to be on the stream that we embrace it. If you know much about the college curriculum, we're very outcomes driven. Alignment's very important to us. All outcomes must match evaluations, etc. So what we like to think about is, it doesn't always have to be about the evaluation. It could be about, and I'm a big proponent of community, so I'm going to say it could be about creating a space for your students to learn in. So I think that with technology at the college, we're at this so what, now what? We're at the now what stage. Because how are we going to embrace this technology so it helps our students succeed and learn? And I think that's what Matt and I are really going to try and delve into a little further today.
So building off that, I brought up this idea of the third space earlier. The third space started off as a post-colonial theory developed by this guy named Homi K. Bhabha. Someone introduced me to his work. It was a teacher at Queen's University named Asha Varadharian. She's brilliant, and she brought up this theory about the third space as something that exists between where we're at and where we're coming from. So it's these structures that once governed us, or these structures that determined how we acted before, and structures that now kind of govern us and work with us or against us. So what is it? And I'm going to give you fair warning. This quote it just reeks of like academia. Like I was reading it, and it kind of makes my head hurt because there's so much It's like, it's like there's so many big words in it. I don't even know what to do with. And I'm a communications teacher, so I kind of bolded at the bottom, although it's not showing up that well. But it says, it is the third space, though unrepresentable in itself, constitutes the discursive conditions of enunciation that ensure that the meaning and symbols of culture have no unity or fixity, that even the same signs can be appropriated, translated, rehistorized, and read anew. And when we're talking about this, I think it becomes especially apparent when we're dealing with social media and when we're dealing with educational technology. Things such as mobile phones. At one point, you would have never seen them as actually an educational tool. It was something to use when you were in a bind or when you needed to communicate with someone on the fly. Whereas now we're using it as a means of assessing students. We're using it to interact with people on multiple levels. You might have just taken a picture of it or be interacting with hashtag communities now. Has anyone taken part in EdChat, the hashtag EdChat? Yeah? Did anyone take part last night? It was really good. It was on discipline. And I'm going to bring that up in a bit. But EdChat itself is a perfect example about how this space changes over time. You can have a topic like discipline. And while I was reading it, I was almost confused because I didn't understand who was talking about punishment or who was talking about discipline. I didn't understand what they meant by certain phrases. And I think that sort of issue led to miscommunications between people. However, for each person, that topic meant something different. And I think that's what we're dealing with things like Twitter as well. When I use Twitter with my students, sorry about that. When I use Twitter with my students, some still see it as this way just to get baseball scores or try and write witty remarks about what happened in a hockey game or a baseball game or try and try and be funny with their friends or whatever. And that's cool too, because I use it for a lot of the same reasons when I'm not using it for work or for school or for communication. But still, different people have different relationships with that technology. And I think the same signs can be appropriated, translated, rehistorized, and read anew. And that every time we meet and we discuss these things, we read it anew in some way. And we find new ways of interpreting it. Randall Packer took it a step further, and I'm almost done with the theory. We're dropping a lot of theory. The first space is the physical world, or the classroom. That's, I guess, the traditional idea of the classroom. It's where we find ourselves as teachers. When we were growing up, in most cases, I'm pretty sure I can safely say this, that when we were growing up, in a lot of cases, we saw the teacher as someone in charge. You had an apple on your desk. And you had a chalkboard, and when students got upset, you could scratch your nails against it, and really that would get on. But it's that physical space that people think about. Then you have the second space, which is, I guess, the virtual world, which we're really finding ourselves navigating now, whether we're teaching hybrid courses, whether we're planning online, whether we're communicating with students online. It's something symbolic and constructed by the imagination in a lot of ways because we give that identity. For example, if I'm using desire to learn, in a classroom setting, then I'm using desire to learn for the sole purpose of educating say, philosophy class or for educating a communications class. And the third space, however, is a shared social collective experience. And it's informed by both the physical and the symbolic. And I use EdChat as an example of that because yesterday when we were talking about discipline, and if you haven't taken part in it, I really encourage it. You just type in hashtag EdChat. Tom Whitby. Did anyone get to catch his speech last year or his presentation last year? Tom Whitby, mustache, Hawaiian shirt. He's amazing. Him and Steven Anderson kind of invented this EdChat hashtag community. He was talking about how discipline, as educators, does discipline lead to poor student behavior, or do certain teacher behaviors lead to poor student behavior? And it led to this whole discussion, but everyone was approaching it from a different angle. For each person in that conversation, the meaning of discipline or the meaning of, effective learning was different. And I think as teachers, we're constantly navigating this third space. When Homi Bhabha first invented this idea, part of the deal was that when you look at someone, and this goes back into, I'm a huge post-colonial politics, but when you look at someone, this idea of the other, oh, this person's not like me, or this, we can't see eye to eye because, we're just completely different. Homie Bob argued that you can't get this idea of the other because it's always changing. So you can't actually pinpoint the other because the other manifests him or herself in this third space that's constantly changing based on the forces they're experiencing. And I think we're very much dealing with the same thing. Our students are constantly changing. We're constantly dealing with different technologies. What's that? Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I'd like to show you, and this is something I've used with a lot of different classes, and it kind of harkens to this idea of the third space. Todaysmeet.com. How many of you have used Today's Meet? And are there any other good back channels out there that people like using? Sorry? Hazel.com? Awesome. And is it the same sort of idea? Like you just kind of, you can log on immediately? Yeah? Oh, perfect. Oh, that's cool. With back channels like Today's Meet, and there was a good seminar on it last year, students can remain anonymous through it, and they can largely create their own space. I think I was in Nashville last summer, and I like old country music, and there's this guy, Ernest Tubbs, and he has a quote. He's an old country singer, and he has a quote that, in order to, I'm going to butcher it, but in order to get better neighbors, the key is to become a better neighbor. Or in order to have good neighbors, you need to be a good neighbor, basically. And I think the same applies to our students in technology. But with Today's Meet, you see students create a space based on their own ideas about what an online community entails. And you see it happen immediately, and then it's gone, which is kind of what I like about it. Todaysmeet.com, students are able to log in. We're having a bit of technical difficulties, but students are able to log in. They can use a fake name. They can use their own name. I use it a lot for putting research together. Oftentimes, I'll have role-playing exercises. Like if we're talking about, for example, a history of the Welland Canal, I'll have one group represented in terms of the family compact, the rich family, or families that kind of invested money in it. One for the farmers, one for William Hamilton Merritt. And it's this role-playing where students can take on different characters and actually create this community within this online chat room, which I think is especially valuable.
The link is on the blog. It doesn't seem to want to come up right now.
Perfect. All right. Moving on. We had this beautiful idea of a workshop period. We were sure we were going to be in a workshop room going into this. So then when we came today and we actually downloaded the app, we're like, oh, we're in the theater. So it just kind of changes the vibe or the dynamic. So if we're back and forth, it's because we had this intention of it being this wholly hands-on experience, and we're still going to try and convey some of that too. So
Is everyone accessing the apps via the blog right now? Because we can't seem to pull it up right now. Can you pull it up or no?
I think we're at a loss here.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, perfect. So for those of you wondering about today's meet, just to kind of interject here. Oh yeah, look at that though. People are already into it. I love it. So obviously I gave the prompt, welcome to the third space. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas pertaining to back channels and other educational technology. And then I asked the question, what are some of the main concerns with regards to how technology is used in your classroom? Ensuring tech is used purposely, not just for bells and whistles. And sorry, what was the other alternative site called? TOZZL. And then sorry about the echoing too. I feel like I'm talking inside of a silo or something. Tozzle. Well, see, people are already ahead of the game. But this is what I mean, is people take part in this and actually create the conversation for themselves. And the conversation kind of goes in different directions too. Obviously, when you use a back channel like this, you always run the risk of some sort of disciplinary issue with regards to students who are remaining anonymous and think that they can have a laugh or play a joke or pull a quick one. And I know we deal with students in higher ed, but you'd be surprised at some of the maturity issues we still have to face with in certain classes. And sometimes it's just plain funny, which I'll show you in a bit when we talk about Linowit. And again, how many participants can come in at once? I'm not sure on that, but I believe it's maybe not unlimited, but I mean, I've never had a class that was too big for it, and I've had about 40 students going at the same time. I remember seeing a presentation last year at the same conference, and there were maybe, I don't know, 60 or 70 people logged in at the same time, asking questions. Using tech as only a direct substitution for what you could do without it. But that's an interesting point in itself, because I don't think that it's a direct substitution for without it. When using technologies like this, I'm always amazed at the students that come out of the woodwork. And I mean, when you're dealing with a diverse, I know in higher ed the students have more options. I mean, they don't have to be there. No one's going to call their parents. No one's going to say, like, where are you? Like, we haven't seen you for a while. We'll send emails and we'll say, like, you know, is everything okay? But there's not the same, I guess, disciplinary action with regards to it. But I think when you use today's Meet, you do get students coming out of the woodworks. And especially if you're using it in small groups, students who would otherwise not speak, who want to stay invisible, will be able to, I guess, ask questions and get involved in class discussion. I had an interesting encounter with a student, one of my landscapers actually, last term, who was very shy, like very stage fright. So they just missed their presentation date. They refused to come in for it. They wanted nothing to do with class discussion. They were very smart, handed in all the assignments. A great person. However, they wanted nothing to do with the assignment. Part of the feedback I got after using today's Meet from that student at least was that they were, I guess, happy to be able to engage in the class that way and ask questions that way. So I think part of what this does and how it relates to the third space is students are able to engage with the course material, I guess, on their own terms. They don't have to, I guess, kind of be too shy to ask a question because they can create an alias and go under that. And obviously that opens up a lot of doors in some cases, but I think if we, I guess, pick and choose our battles with regards to how we're using it, it comes off a little bit better. I'm going to let Tania take on the Parker Palmer.
So I'm going to chime in now with some discussion on technology and creating community in your classroom. I'm a big proponent, I'm a big follower of Parker Palmer. If anyone has a reading list this summer, I encourage you to read Parker Palmer. I actually spoke with Parker Palmer when I presented at another conference. I spoke to him via phone, which was a huge deal for me. So the actual community model is that it's a circle. And rather than we were all taught in university where we have this, the teacher, professor, instructor is the sage on the stage, instead we have a model where the students uncover rather than the teacher covers. So instead of a classroom of competition, you have a classroom of collaboration. Instead of a classroom filled with I would say uncollaborative behavior, I would say you have more kindness and civility. And if you can imagine, this is how I work my college classrooms. I teach into business, I teach into, Matt and I both teach into the horticulture area. It doesn't matter what area I teach into, I believe in teaching community, and then I link it to technology. So more than that, it's called the Community of Truth Model. It's Parker Palmer's, and it's a wonderful way to gauge community in your classroom. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Linowit and also Google Slides. So to me, community is creating this inclusive space. And I like to get to know my students more, even though I teach at the in higher ed. I like to make sure I get to know my students better because I feel then I can teach to them more. So I use the activity Linowit, and you saw it is on our blog. And Linowit is a great way for your students to identify the classroom climate. So usually I'll give you some examples of how I use it. In the first class, now I don't know what your ability with technology is in your schools, This could be done at night, it could be done in the library, it could be done on cell phones, computers, whatnot. I have my students gauging the classroom climate by creating the expectations of each other. So they can use visuals, they can use words, but basically what I call it the kindness space. It has all kinds of different names. In my horticulture group, I call it the green wall. And often students will post photos of things that they've grown over the summer. And sometimes this gets interesting in college, but that's why we can delete things. So you're the master of the Linoet board, and it becomes this wonderful space. Sometimes I use it as a technique in my classroom where students are stressed out, it's exam time, I tell them to post a funny photo. And, you know, I put my Linoet board up, and it becomes this really wonderful classroom space that students really like to own. And it's really, I find it very powerful. And I have not had any difficulties with it. I know that, you know, we talk about, you know, having to somehow always have this over the shoulder on our students. I feel that I create a classroom environment that doesn't welcome any type, it discourages. Essentially, it discourages rudeness and that type of anger, so it ends up being a really nice board.
When I started using Linoet, we kind of talked about this, and Tania and I have this thing where every couple of months or so we'll meet up and we'll talk about technology we're using in the classroom. And I mean, you can guess how communication is received in a college atmosphere, right? Like, if you're teaching a group of brewmasters who spend, let's say, 8 hours a day brewing beer, drinking beer, talking about beer, dissecting every piece of it, and then you throw them in a class about twice a week where they talk about like writing a report, you know where the weak link is going to be in terms of how they're engaged and in terms of what they think of their program. The goal here is to use technology in such a way that actually puts students on the spot and makes them comfortable with, I guess, revealing who they actually are to their teacher. And in that way, you're developing this further sense of community in your classroom. I posted in some of this, and I'll get back to this. This is one of the clips from today's meet that I used with a previous class, which I'll explain in a second. We have a picture of Homie Baba. This, obviously a bit hard to see, it's as large as I could make it. When I was first meeting my horticulture students, again, their student group who is very much disengaged with communication on a lot of different levels, and for obvious reasons. I mean, if I spent most of my days digging around soil, which I do in the summer because I like gardening, but planting things and talking about plants, talking about insects, and you throw them in a class where they have to write like a persuasive letter in week 7, they're probably going to be pretty upset and feel as though they're not that engaged. But having this as a bit of a back channel in the classroom gave me a chance to meet the students. For example, on the first day, one of my shyest students in the class, again, said, my name's Ashley. I was named after an ash tree that grew in my grandmother's backyard. I think this gave me a love of horticulture from the beginning. And right away, you have that connection with someone. In the conversation on EdChat yesterday, which I'm going to I actually did it yesterday just to get pumped up. So like, I knew when I came here, I was just on a mission. So I was listening to the Eagles on the drive in and like thinking about all the good combos I had on EdChat. But what blew me away was that people were talking about it. But to me, it just seems like common sense. And I taught 2 years at the secondary level in England as well. And part of developing this sense of class respect and this idea of classroom management, and I know it's not always the case, but is developing a community of respect in the class from day one and finding ways to talk to your students like people. And again, I feel so elementary saying it, but it's true. And if you can learn something like this on day one, and if you can see the campus in the same way that other students see it, then you're kind of onto something there. Obviously, this is a bit of a jab. Niagara College pays its employees well. This sign says natural pest control. Does anyone know what it's referring to? Has anyone been to our campus?
The Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Niagara-on-the-Lake campus, sorry. Well, we have a cat named Basil, who is our natural pest control, and he pretty much gets to sleep in the greenhouse all day. and then he hunts the mice whenever he pleases, and also comes out for a pet here and there. So
he's actually quite famous at the college.
yeah, he is. He's very famous. And I'd invite you. This is going to be my spiel where I can invite you over, but just come by the college sometime, hang out. Yesterday, I actually saw Basil, and as I was walking from my office to the retail brewery to pick up beer, and then to the bakery to pick up bread. So I grabbed a beer, bread, and I pet a cat. And in a matter of like minutes, it was amazing. It's like, where can you get that sort of experience? But yeah, so this is Linowid. This is Linowid.
If you want to pull up one of my samples, COM 1250.
That's mine.
Oh, is that yours?
Yeah.
Is it any good?
This is another sample of what I worked on
Yeah.
with the class. And again, this was very much an icebreaker in terms of developing a sense of community from day one. I think it's... She likes pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. Might be true. This is one of my students as well. And this picture, actually it's strange because this picture, in one picture, I mean, he basically gave me a vibe of who he was and how he was going to be all term. And he was a great guy, but he just like loved to sleep. Like he loved it, which was a bit of a challenge in an 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning class on a Tuesday. Also pictures of campus. And when I sent them out on this task, the goal was take a picture of something that means something to you on campus. So immediately you're situating yourself as someone who cares about what students are interested in. You want to see the campus in the same way that students see it. A lot of students did go to, obviously, being college students. I mean, could be anyone too, but a lot of students did go to the teaching brewery. I have mine here. I talked about why I like being part of NC. And these are all horticulture students again, so there's a lot of flowers. It was September, it was sunny. I do these with my culinary students. And again, you see the world through their perspective, which is especially interesting.
I find that the boards become very reflective of the group. So if I'm teaching accountants, they're very like there's numbers and they're very not a lot of visuals, but there's a lot of booky numbers, things like that. So they're really reflective.
This is from my culinary students. This one's very meta. It's a picture of a picture, peaceful life. It's pretty serene. My students at the brewery, of course, which is a very popular spot, as you probably can imagine. And so that's Linowid. Oh.
So I just wanted to talk briefly about Google presentations. I wonder if that might be old school right now. Does anyone use that in their classrooms? Does anyone want to share how they use it? Nice, nice. Anyone else want to share? Sorry, I can't really see. Does anyone else want to share? Beauty.
That's awesome.
I love it. So the way I tend to use it is because I do a lot of collaboration and group work in my class. I have a group of 4 students have a case study. Each of them are working on the same case study. They're able to kind of see what everyone else is doing. So each group would be working on the same thing and coming up with a different approach to the answer. That's one way I like to use it in my classroom. And it's not an evaluated method. It's just something that they can do to practice a theory in communications that we may be working on.
I think the last type of technology we'll look at is, something that's obviously a bit of a catchphrase lately, and we're using one as the filter for this presentation. Collaborative blogs. Part of what's being written into a lot of our course outlines is the ability to publish something online. And right now it's pretty general, but as we move forward and as we develop course outlines and I guess develop further documents relating to certain courses, one of the huge pieces of emphasis is how well a student can participate in this act of, digital citizenship, or is how digitally literate a student can say they are. And obviously, again, this has been a catchphrase the last 2 years, is just because students have their heads in their phones all the time doesn't necessarily make them digitally literate. But I think what I've found with doing these collaborative blogs is that students are consistently surprising me. And you see it in a lot of programs, like I'll take my landscapers for example. The landscapers typically hate being in class. They hate that experience of having to write in class or having a structured writing piece. And realistically, I don't blame them. If I got into landscaping, the last thing I'd probably want to do as I was getting my career off the ground was like sit and write a letter or a report, even though obviously these skills are huge. But what I found when incorporating blogs into those classes is that students were more aware of tone, of voice, of purpose in writing. And through that, they were able to look at blogs that they frequent on a day-to-day basis, whether that's, I guess, a Bleacher Report, or whether it's blogs about gardening or blogs about plants, and come to a better understanding of what's expected of them. My brewmasters, again, I keep raving about them, but they're amazing. Like, they're an amazing group of students. These are students who are likely on their second or third career, and it's not that they had failed careers, it's just they wanted something different. They wanted to make beer, and bless them, because it's amazing. And also they're a big fan of like bringing samples, and there's an event every term called Project Brew where they share their term beers, which is amazing as well. I developed this blog with them, and we talked about social media marketing, especially as a craft brewery. Craft breweries are a very specific industry, mainly because when we're talking about them, we're talking about an industry that probably doesn't have all the money that someone like Anheuser-Busch does, or AB Bev, or someone like Sapporo has. They don't have that type of money to advertise. So advertising becomes very much how you can build your own personal brand. I mean, just as you've probably been told here in terms of how we develop our brands as teachers. What I found was that students were extremely eager to actually share their understanding of their industry via these blogs. This one we use WordPress. This term I took it a step further, and I'm still in the process of putting it together. But I had students actually conduct interviews and visit breweries in Southern Ontario and upstate New York and actually talk about some of the challenges. And what I found was that students were actually, and students asked me for extensions just so they could, I guess, meet someone who they would have otherwise not had a chance to meet, which I was obviously more than happy to give them. I had students traveling to different towns in New York, all over Ontario, and even as far as Quebec, interviewing people and asking for, I guess, advice on the trials of running your own brewery. And I think this sort of learning is invaluable. And if we're talking about developing a classroom space, engaging with technology in creative ways, but largely allowing the students to determine how they're using that, like that's, I think that process is more valuable than any sort of, I guess, hand-in assignment I could have given them. And it all comes down to how they develop their own space. And I know we're running out of time, so I guess we should probably wrap things up. We have about 4 minutes left.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about digital citizenship. I know the lovely Alec has already talked about it this morning, but I just wanted to mention a couple things about it. I find that the best thing we could do with technology for our students is to teach them how to use it and how to use it properly. There's this assumption, even at the college level, that students are very savvy with technology, but they aren't. They only know what they want to know. So it's very important for us as educators to lead them to success and not failure. And we cannot propagate technology in the classroom unless we prepare our students and teach them how to use it and how to use it properly. So I always have an expectation. I don't like to call them rules because I think rules tend to be, it's a negative word for expectations for me. So I use classroom expectations so that they know that if they're on a discussion board, this is how they have to act, and that there will be consequences if they act in a certain way, right? So I think, and you know what, at the college level, no one wants their work deleted. I think it's embarrassing, and I think it comes with other social stigmas, so they don't, so they really participate well. I don't know what it's like in the primary, secondary, but that's how I feel in the college classroom. And I also have this community-based classroom where we discuss it. We have an open discussion. We're linnowing it. We're deciding together what we want our technology in our classroom community. So that becomes very important. You can't expect students to understand digital citizenship or to understand technology unless you teach them how to use it properly. So I just wanted to add that in with the whole technology piece.
Absolutely, yeah. And it does come down to just creating an environment. And I mean, we say it over and over again, and I think as teachers and at any level, we're constantly navigating this kind of cheesiness. Like when we're saying it's just a culture of respect, which is so true, but I mean, we say it so much that it almost becomes like cheesy. It's almost like, won't someone think of the children from The Simpsons? How it's said over and over again, you're like, oh, here it comes again. But it's so true. And I think to see it in action via students actually creating these learning spaces is extremely valuable. And I know it becomes challenging depending on age group, depending on type of school, location, all these things, but I still think it's something we can consider. And I'm not here to say, oh, the third space, man, it's like there. Like, come on, navigate it with me. Like, I'm not going about it like that. I'm just saying, like, the third space is a way we can consider this type of learning. And it's a type of learning that is very student-centered, that allows students to create their own environments, which leads me into my closing points. First, the technology we use is more than just a supplement to learning in a lot of cases. It's the space in itself, where learning is not only enjoyed, but also created by users. And I mean, the example that was brought up about how to use Google Docs with a school in a different country and put ideas together is a testament to that, I feel. And that's a learning space created by students. But we see it in Facebook groups and things too, where students are just taking control of their learning. And I mean, there's issues with that, I'm sure, in terms of students sharing answers to tests and whatnot still, but what more powerful act is there than creating your community? And if that can be done via a Facebook chat with 10 of your classmates, then why is that a bad thing? And why can't we actually harness that and support that process? Two, educators are both architects and facilitators in this sense. This role changes with each class program area, or program area and level of need. And when Homi K. Baba talked about the other never being the same, because you're always being hit with new experiences, you're always interacting with different individuals, I think we're constantly faced with that as educators as well. Because every term, in a lot of cases, I know that's not the same, but for us, just speaking from a higher ed perspective, we're faced with a new group of students every 14 weeks. And it becomes our goal to build those relationships even, as soon as the first week, which is why we use things like Lino in today's meet. And we never treat the same group the same twice. Just because, even with brewmasters, I had a group this term that was just so into it. They were great researchers. They all had academic backgrounds. They were amazing. They were amazing writers. They were amazing researchers. And the beers they made were actually damn good too. Whereas last term, it was a totally different class. The class was very kinesthetic based. This group was very much, science based as well. The writing skills weren't up to the level of the group I just was faced with, and I had to adjust my learning and adjust my instructional techniques and adjust the technologies that I used. So we're constantly faced with a different student body, and it becomes how do we adapt to those based on the tools we want to use. And lastly, community is no longer defined by time and space in a lot of cases. It's largely a conversation and process which can be dropped in or out of. And when we're teaching in a hybrid way, I find that we do this all the time, is that we see students who are so engaged with it, and then other students will just kind of drop in only when absolutely necessary and drop out. But in this way, community doesn't exist in, I was thinking about this last night. Let me just rephrase this. But I grew up in Fenwick, just down the road. And Fenwick's anyone from Fenwick? No, of course not. But Fenwick's a very small town. It's just kind of near Welland. But Fenwick's so small that you should know everybody. It's less than 1,000 people, or was at that time. I didn't really have much in common with people in Fenwick. I had a few friends, but thinking back, I didn't really communicate that authentically with people who even lived right down the road from me. I had a friend who just moved up. He was actually recording a record in Fenwick at a recording studio. He moved up from Arkansas. We dressed the same. We listened to the same music. We even drink the same beer, which is a crazy thing. I have more in common with this guy based on the interest communities that we've kind of frequented since we were kids. So community isn't this like closed physical space anymore. And I think as educators, we need to, I guess, still do more to figure out exactly what that entails in each specific class. So thanks a lot for taking part in this with us. And we'd be more than willing to talk after if you have any questions too. Cheers.